History is, well, it's a messy business. And often, the most profound movements, the spiritual and cultural shifts that completely redefine civilizations, they come with a really heavy human cost.
That's absolutely right. We're talking about periods that literally reshape the map.
And more than that, they reshape the demographic reality of the world.
Exactly. And when we examine the emergence and the subsequent expansion of Islam from the 7th century onwards, we're really looking at one of those foundational civilization-altering events.
So that's our mission for this deep dive. We're jumping into a stack of historical analyses that try to quantify the human life losses tied to this emergence and its centuries of expansion.
And we're not just listing battles or dates. The goal here is to try and grasp the sheer scale of it all.
The sources we're using pull together a lot of historical research, and they're trying to synthesize the human toll across these vast periods of conquest, resistance, and, well, total societal upheaval.
And we have to say this right up front for you listening. All historical estimates like this, especially over such a huge timescale, they come with massive margins of error.
Of course. These are approximations.
But they provide a necessary, if pretty sobering, perspective on the demographic scale of what happened.
Exactly. The goal is to understand not just the absolute numbers, but what they really meant at the time. We have to look at these losses against the backdrop of the world population back then.
Context is everything.
Okay, so let's unpack this. Before we even get to the conflicts and the numbers, the sources lay out a really crucial theological framework.
Yes, because it basically sets the ideological stage for everything that follows. We have to start with the Islamic position on the earlier Abrahamic faiths.
Right, the idea of altered scriptures. In Islamic theology, it's known as tahrif.
And the core claim is that the previous divine revelations, so the Torah, the Psalms, the Gospels, were all altered or corrupted by people over time.
Which made them unreliable guides to God's final will.
Precisely. Islam holds that the Torah, was revealed perfectly to Moses, or Musa, the Psalms, the Zabur, to David, Dawood, and the Gospel, the Injil, to Jesus, or Isa.
And the belief is that the Quran was sent as the final, perfectly preserved revelation to restore those original monotheistic teachings that had been, lost or distorted.
And that's a profound theological justification, isn't it? The idea that your divine predecessors got it wrong and that you're here to correct the record.
It is. But this is where the historical evidence compiled in the sources gives us a really fascinating counterpoint.
It raises a huge historical question. If these older scriptures were corrupted, where's the evidence? Where is the original unaltered text they're talking about?
Because the historical record we actually have suggests something very different. It suggests a remarkable degree of stability.
Let's start with Judaism. The earliest Torah texts, the Pentateuch, they predate Islam by centuries.
And we have incredible archaeological proof like the Dead Sea Scrolls.
Right, dating back to the 2nd century BCE. And when scholars analyze those scrolls, they find a very, very close alignment with the later Torah texts we have.
So it shows this strong textual stability over hundreds and hundreds of years, long before Islam even emerged.
Exactly. The sources are clear on this. If massive corruption happened, you'd see it. There would be a radical break in the manuscript tradition, and it's just not there.
And we see the same kind of consistency when we look at the origins of Christianity.
We do. The canonical Gospels were written between 50 and 100 CE. We have early manuscripts, like the Codex Sinaiticus from the 4th century, and even tiny earlier fragments like Papyrus 52 from the 2nd century.
And they all tell a similar story.
A story of remarkable textual consistency across time and across geography. It's also really key to note here that Christianity doesn't recognize a single unified Injil like the one described in the Quran. It's built on 4 distinct Gospels.
So if we put this all together, the sources conclude that this Islamic position, the idea of tahrif, is rooted more in theological necessity.
It has to be. It provides the justification for the Quran to be the final, necessary, and ultimate revelation.
It's a theological statement about Scripture being corrupted?
But it's one that just hasn't been confirmed by any of the pre-Quran manuscript evidence we have. There are no surviving pre-Islamic manuscripts of these so-called original unaltered revelations.
In fact, the texts we do have show the opposite. They show strong continuity.
So this theological framework establishes the Quran as the corrective, as the ultimate divine authority. And that's an incredibly powerful intellectual basis for the mission of expansion that follows.
Okay, so if that's the framework, this need for correction and ultimate authority, let's track how that played out on the ground. Let's look at the scale of human life losses. This is where it gets really Really sobering.
It does. We're now talking about the quantifiable human cost from about 600 CE to 1800 CE.
And the first thing we really need to wrap our heads around is just the significance of scale.
The world was a much, much smaller place. The total world population during that main period of expansion, say the 7th to the 17th centuries, was tiny compared to today.
What are we talking about, roughly?
Well, in the year 1000 CE, so right in the middle of this, global population estimates are around 300 million people. Total.
300 million. That's less than the current population of just the United States.
Exactly. So when we start talking about losses in the millions or tens of millions, we're not talking about a blip.
We're talking about a significant, lasting chunk of the entire global human population at the time.
Absolutely. The sources use visual data to track the cumulative loss against the total world population, and the takeaway is clear. These losses represent a substantial proportion of humanity. They cause long-term demographic shifts, not just marginal fluctuations.
Which is why these estimates, even if they're approximate, are so important for conveying the historical magnitude. So when we combine all the conflicts, all the conquests, the persecutions over this 1,300-year span, what's the total?
The aggregate total derived from the sources is just staggering, an estimated 110 million to 170 million total human life losses.
Wow. Okay, that's a figure that demands a closer look. How do historians even begin to compile a number like that?
Well, let's break it down. The sources identify 6 main categories of conflict and persecution that contribute to that enormous total.
Okay, let's start at the beginning. The early expansion, 7th and 8th centuries, right after the foundational period.
First up, you have the early Islamic conquests. After the death of the Prophet Muhammad in 632 CE, the expansion across the Middle East, North Africa, and Persia was incredibly rapid and marked by intense military campaigns.
And the toll from that initial thrust.
That's estimated to have caused 10 to 20 million deaths, and that's from direct warfare, from sieges, and just the immense societal disruption that happens when empires collapse and new rulers take over.
And that's soldiers and civilians.
Oh, yes. Vast numbers of civilians caught in the middle of it all.
And of course, those initial conquests created new borders, which means new conflicts.
That's the second category, border conflicts and resistance. This accounts for another 5 to 10 million deaths. These were sustained conflicts with places like the Byzantine Empire in the west or the Hindu kingdoms in the east.
So not one single war, but just decades of friction in pushing those borders.
Exactly, a state of persistent, low-grade to mid-grade warfare that resulted in a constant loss of life.
Okay, so next we move from pure military conquest to something more systemic. The management of the people who were conquered. The pressure on non-Muslims.
This is a critical category. Religious persecution and forced conversions. It's estimated to contribute another 10 to 15 million deaths over the centuries.
So as these empires grew, how did they treat the non-Muslim populations, the Christians, Jews, Zoroastrians?
It varied. Some were allowed to practice their faith under what's known as dhimmi status, but they were subjected to severe social restrictions and critically heavy taxation, the jizya.
So explain that. How does a tax, the jizya, translate into loss of life? I mean, it sounds like an economic problem, not warfare.
But it often became a matter of survival. The sources highlight that the jizya was a crippling economic burden for many families and communities.
So if you couldn't pay,
If you failed to pay, you could face violence, enslavement, seizure of your property, which led to displacement, famine, and just an inability to sustain life. It was often functionally a death sentence.
and I imagine that pressure was a huge driver for conversion.
A massive driver. And for those who resisted, they could face execution or mob violence. This intolerance was a key multiplier of civilian deaths.
Okay, now shifting to the later periods. The expansion didn't stop in the 8th century. Now we're talking about huge, powerful empires from the 9th to the 17th centuries.
Right, which brings us to the later conquests. This is estimated at 15 to 30 million deaths.
And this is associated with empires like the Ottomans, the Safavids.
And the Mughals, yes. We're talking about huge events like the conquest of Constantinople in 1453 or the massive Mughal campaigns across India. This was continued, large-scale violence to maintain and expand these vast empires.
And as you mentioned, the conflict wasn't only external. There were deep internal divisions, too.
Precisely. We have sectarian violence, specifically between Sunni and Shia Muslims. The sources attribute 5 to 10 million deaths to this category over the centuries.
And this goes all the way back to the beginning.
It does. From foundational battles like Karbala right after the prophet's death, and those same deep divisions trace all the way into modern struggles, it's another layer of persistent, religiously motivated violence.
Which brings us to the final, and by far the largest source of human loss detailed in the material, the conflicts in South Asia.
In India,
Yes, the Hindu-Muslim conflicts in India. This single category accounts for an estimated 60 to 80 million deaths.
60 to 80 million, that's a massive disproportionate share of the total.
It is. The sources stress the incredible timeline and the sheer intensity of these events. This estimate covers centuries of invasions, massacres, the destruction of temples, and forced conversions.
Under rulers like Mahmud of Ghazni, the Delhi Sultanate, all the way through periods of Mughal rule. It was a prolonged, brutal process.
Why such a disproportionately high number for that region? What makes it so different from, say, the early conquests in the Middle East?
It seems to be a combination of factors. Demographics, for one. India was one of the most densely populated regions in the world, so the pool of potential victims was just enormous.
More people there to begin with.
Right. And second, the sources suggest that the campaigns against the Hindu kingdoms were often marked by extreme violence and religious zeal. This led to substantial civilian massacres, long-term famine, displacement.
So it was just a sustained, brutal process that went on for over 7 centuries.
Constantly replenishing the death toll. It's a horrifying thought.
So when we synthesize all this, what's the big takeaway about the connection between the religious doctrine and the political action on the ground?
What's fascinating, in a grim way, is the finding that this aggressive intolerance contributed so significantly to the scale of the losses.
It wasn't just about territory.
No. Religious motivations often amplified the human toll far beyond what a typical war for territory might cause. The demand for religious conformity, the systemic pressure through things like the jizya, the theological justification for conquest, these were key forces driving those civilian casualties.
And we have to reiterate that regional variation. India really stands out, bearing the largest share of these losses.
It absolutely does. It underscores the severity and the demographic impact of those conflicts compared to other regions.
Now, the analyses do provide some comparative context, right? This isn't happening in a historical vacuum.
That's a crucial point. While these numbers are monumental, historians do observe similar death tolls in other major long-term religious or imperial expansions throughout history.
So it's not unique to Islam, but part of a broader, terrible pattern.
It highlights the general destructive potential when religious dogma and the desire for territorial conquest become fused together, no matter the specific faith or empire.
So to quickly review that incredible cost, the total 110 or 170 million loss breaks down into early and later military conquests, border wars, chronic religious persecution and forced conversions, internal sectarian violence.
And, of course, that massive component attributed to the intense Hindu-Muslim conflicts.
In conclusion, what do the sources tell us?
They show that the emergence of Islam was, without a doubt, a period of profound global transformation. But the human life losses quantified here, they just underline the heavy cost of these historical conflicts that are driven by that merger of religious dogma and political power.
And understanding the figures, especially when you remember how small the global population was, gives you crucial insight into the massive, lasting scale of these consequences.
It really does.
And that raises an important final question for you to think about. Given the inherent uncertainty in these kinds of historical estimates, what other societal losses, the non-quantifiable ones, should we also consider?
Things like the permanent destruction of cultural heritage, the forced mass displacement of entire populations.
The permanent loss of unique demographic and linguistic groups. What's the full cost when we think about those massive historical transformations? That's something for you to explore further.
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the source material.
We'll see you next time.